I want to turn to your questioning last week in front of that committee of Dr. Anthony Fauci. He pled the Fifth Agreement more than 100 times in response to your questions and those of others on the panel. Were you surprised that he came in with that approach, or did you expect that?
We didn't know what to expect. We were debating it that morning whether he would testify or not. I think he could have testified honestly. If he was worried about saying that he destroyed records, he has a pardon for that. So he did destroy a lot of records. We think, and we're still going to look at this, but we think hundreds, if not thousands of records were destroyed, that it was a routine practice by him. We have his executive assistant saying, I destroyed a ton of records this weekend, a ton of emails this weekend. If he would have admitted to that, he wouldn't have had culpability. Just had to, and even he could even justify it. He could even say, "Oh well, I didn't think they were important. I didn't think they were government records." He could make all kinds of excuses. They probably wouldn't be acceptable to me, but I think he could have escaped legal culpability. And unfortunately, I think for him, the country and history will remember him as pleading the Fifth 111 times, and it didn't look good. And there are arguments on both sides of every debate, but the biggest thing is, I want people to understand that it's a bad idea to fund dangerous research. It was a particularly bad idea to fund this in China. And this wasn't a one-off. Anthony Fauci has been one of the probably most famous advocates of this gain-of-function research going back to when they manipulated the avian flu in 2010. Manipulating the avian flu, which has a 50% death rate, to make it more infectious to mammals is a death wish for the world. And there needs to be a debate about this, open, without politics, a debate about whether we should fund manipulating animal viruses to make them more infectious to humans. I think it is something really that we need to look at as if we were looking at nuclear weapons and trying to prevent nuclear war.
And people really wanted answers out of that hearing. I mean, there's still an open question and some dispute about how this COVID-19 virus that killed 1.2 million Americans, how it came to be and how the next one could be prevented. But part of the reason that Dr. Fauci and his team said they came in with the approach of pleading the Fifth is because they had heard specifically from you time and again that you wanted Dr. Fauci to be jailed. Here's a little of what you've said over the years.
Fauci should go to prison for 5 years for lying to Congress. They've prosecuted other people. They've selectively gone after Republicans. But in no way will they do anything about him lying. It's a felony punishable with 5 years in jail. We've referred it to the Department of Justice. I don't think Biden's Department of Justice will do anything with it. But yes, it is very dangerous to have public officials who we need to have trust in coming and lying to us. But he has lied dozens of times.
You believe that Anthony Fauci belongs in jail?
Without question.
Senator, the Wall Street Journal editorial board wrote this week, Mr. Paul is too set on criminalizing policy differences in our view, and Dr. Fauci does not belong in jail on evidence that we have seen. Do you still believe that Dr. Anthony Fauci should go to prison?
I'll give you an example of the level of dishonesty. In January of 2020, as the epidemic was just coming to our shores, he received private information, and he agreed with it, that the epidemic didn't start in the wet market. The wet market was a super spreader event, but the original people who were sick from COVID were not associated with the wet market. But because the wet market is an argument for a natural occurrence, he continued to argue that for year and year, but he wasn't telling us that he privately disagreed with himself. He also said in January 2020, he said that we are worried that this virus has been manipulated because we know they do gain-of-function research. So when he says, oh, we never funded gain-of-function research in private, he was very worried that they were doing this research. Now, he would argue our money didn't go to it, but I would argue that you really shouldn't be funding a lab that you're worried that they are doing gain-of-function research.
So should he go to prison for that, Senator?
Well, that's a good question. Did he lie to Congress? I think he did lie to Congress. And I think to be fair, that people who lie to Congress should be charged with a felony and, if convicted, go to jail. There's also the question of destroying records. That's also a felony crime. So I think both destroying records and lying to Congress are serious crimes. But the reason is, and what I've always wanted more than, whether he goes to jail or not, is the truth and an understanding from the public that this research is so dangerous that it has to have intense scrutiny, that I think in all likelihood we funded a lab and this virus came from the lab. and maybe 15 million people died. This isn't the first time. This happened in 1977. Right. We have virtually absolute proof in 1977 that a virus leaked out and infected the whole world, an influenza virus.